You're standing on a frozen field south of Bucharest. December 1476. The fighting has stopped, but Vlad III, Prince of Wallachia, the man who impaled tens of thousands, is gone. Not dead in front of witnesses. Not captured. Simply gone. And you have less than an hour to decide what you saw. This is not the story history gave you. The battle death, the warrior's end, the clean Ottoman victory. That version was constructed quickly by men who needed it to hold. What actually happened on this field has been buried under 5 centuries of deliberate silence. And the evidence that survived was never supposed to. The captain moves through the wreckage without urgency. That is the tell. A man searching desperately runs. He walks, methodically, face low, checking the fallen one by one. He is looking for his prince. Vlad III, the Impaler. 3 months restored to power and already the most dangerous man in Eastern Europe again. He is not here. The captain already knows 3 things that the history books will never record. First, Vlad was not cut down in front of anyone. There are no witnesses to the killing blow, not one. Second, the Ottoman cavalry has not yet arrived to claim the field. Whatever happened here, the Ottomans did not see it either. Third, 2 of the captain's own men are missing. Not among the dead. Not retreating north with the others. Simply absent. He notices this. He says nothing. Then he hears hoofbeats. From the north. From behind him. From the direction of his own retreating forces. If you find yourself wanting to know how many other medieval deaths were officially recorded one way and deliberately engineered another, this channel documents exactly those cases every week. Subscribe now, because the next one is already stranger than this. The rider who emerges from the tree line is Wallachian, not Ottoman. He delivers his message with the flat effect of a man reciting something he was instructed to say and nothing more. The prince was seen alive, riding hard toward the Carpathian passes. He escaped. For a moment, just a moment, the captain feels something that almost functions like relief. He does not examine that feeling closely. Instead, he does what survivors do. He finds a story useful and builds around it immediately. He begins issuing orders. Consolidate. Establish a perimeter. Prepare to report a tactical withdrawal, not a collapse. If the prince fled north, there's an explanation. If there is an explanation, there's a mourning after this one. Then the second rider arrives. This one is carrying Ottoman colors, a flag of parley, a formal messenger. He is not announcing victory. He is requesting confirmation of the prince's status. The captain stops. The Ottomans are asking, which means they do not know, which means they do not have him. And if someone was supposed to deliver Vlad III to Ottoman hands, the transaction is not complete. Or it was never that kind of transaction at all. The messenger waits. The field is still. Every man within earshot has gone quiet without being told to. The captain looks at the Ottoman rider and understands, with the particular clarity that mortal situations produce, that whatever he says next will determine the shape of the rest of his life. He opens his mouth. We'll come back to what he says. Because first, you need to understand the room in which all of this was possible. The political architecture that made betrayal not just thinkable, but rational. Wallachia, November 1476. A principality that had never once enjoyed the luxury of a single, uncomplicated enemy. The Ottoman Empire pressed from the south. The Kingdom of Hungary exerted its influence from the west. And caught between them, a prince who had just reclaimed his throne for the 3rd time in his life, backed by Hungarian military force, holding power for exactly 6 weeks. 6 weeks. In that time, Vlad III had already begun doing what Vlad III always did upon returning to power, dismantling the structures that had flourished in his absence. The boyar class, Wallachia's landed nobility, had spent 12 years building comfortable arrangements with whoever sat on the throne. They had survived 2 regime changes by being useful to the right people at the right moment. Now the man they feared most was back, and the Hungarian troops who restored him were already being withdrawn. Here is where contemporary records introduce a detail that most accounts bury in a footnote. Venetian diplomatic correspondence, dispatches from envoys stationed in Constantinople, documents that Vlad's severed head arrived at the Ottoman court within days of his death. Not weeks. Days. Consider the geography. The fastest overland courier route from the Bucharest region to Constantinople covers several hundred miles of winter road. Under optimal conditions, the journey takes days at minimum. For a head to arrive that quickly, already preserved, already identified, already confirmed by Mem 2's court, the logistics do not support a chaotic battlefield retrieval. Someone had a plan before the battle concluded. Someone was ready with a container. Someone knew the route. The question that now hangs over everything, the one that will not resolve for several chapters yet, is this: who benefits most if the official story reads killed in battle by Ottoman forces rather than killed by his own people? To answer that, you have to go back further. Not weeks, years. Wallachia, 1456 through 1462. Vlad's second reign, the one that built the legend. Contemporary accounts, including the dispatches of Papal Legate Nicholas of Madras and the German pamphlet literature circulating across Central Europe in the 1460s, document what his rule meant for the boyar class specifically. The public impalement of rival noble families, the redistribution of their ancestral lands to loyal military commanders, the systematic elimination of hereditary power that had persisted for generations. These were not random acts. They were administrative policy applied with cold consistency. The boyars who survived did so by learning to read Vlad's intentions faster than their neighbors. That skill kept them alive. It also meant that by 1476, they understood exactly what his restoration signaled for their futures. And here is the element that makes the political geometry of December 1476 so precise. When Vlad returned to power, the boyars who had served his Ottoman-backed rival, Basarab Lyota, did not flee. They stayed. They were at court. They were in the army. Some held positions in proximity to the prince's personal security arrangements. These were men whose estates, whose families, whose survival depended on Vlad not consolidating power. They had not been punished upon his return, yet. That word carried enormous weight in Wallachia. Yet, Basarab Lyota's loyalists embedded inside Vlad's own military structure had no reason to fight for him. They had every rational incentive to ensure the restoration ended quickly, cleanly, and in a manner that Ottoman military force could absorb as its own victory. What happened in the final minutes on that field was not chaos. It was geometry. Constantinople, late December 1476. A courier enters the Ottoman court carrying something packed in a sealed container. The preservation method is honey, chosen deliberately, not incidentally. Honey was understood in the ancient world as a substance that arrested decay while maintaining outward appearance. The face, when the container was opened, would look almost peaceful, almost composed. The documentary record of what followed is specific. Venetian envoys present in Constantinople noted the display. They recorded the identification. They recorded the Sultan's reception of this proof. What none of them recorded, what none of them thought to question, was the timeline. Now, work the mathematics carefully because this is where the official story stops holding its shape. Vlad's death is placed by most chronicle sources in mid to late December 1476. The Venetian account of the head's display in Constantinople falls within days of that date. The overland distance, the winter road conditions, the time required to prepare remains for transport in a manner suitable for presentation to a sultan's court. The hours needed simply to locate, confirm, and retrieve a body from a contested field where the fighting had only just concluded. The numbers do not work. Not for a battlefield retrieval. They work for exactly one other scenario: a prearranged transfer, organized before the engagement, along a known route, with a prepared container and an expected destination. The head did not need to travel urgently from a chaotic field. It needed to travel a familiar road from a planned origin point. Go back now to Chapter 1. The captain searching the battlefield. The two missing soldiers. The Ottoman messenger arriving not to announce a kill, but to request confirmation. The hoofbeats from the north, from behind the Wallachian lines, not from the Ottoman advance. The captain was not searching for his prince in confusion. He was searching for evidence of what had already been done by men inside his own formation, who had slipped away before the field went quiet, carrying something that needed to reach Constantinople before anyone thought to ask questions. And the Ottoman messenger was not seeking information. He was determining whether the captain knew, whether the captain was, in the language of people who arrange such things, a problem. Now, at last, we hear what the captain says. He looks at the Ottoman writer. He speaks clearly, without hesitation, without visible distress. He confirms that Vlad III, Prince of Wallachia, died in battle against Ottoman forces. He says it as a man states a fact he has already decided is true. He is not lying for his prince. His prince is beyond help. He is lying for the only person in his immediate vicinity whose survival still depends on the correct answer. The days that follow have a particular texture. Not violent, not dramatic, quiet in the way that the aftermath of irreversible decisions tends to be quiet. The captain returns to a fortified Wallachian position and manages his men one conversation at a time. Not orders, conversations. Quiet, brief, standing close. What are we saying? What are we not saying? He moves through the camp, performing the ordinary functions of command while assembling, beneath that surface, a story sturdy enough to outlast scrutiny. Then one of the missing soldiers reappears. He is not injured. He carries money, not a soldier's wage, not a battlefield salvage, but the specific, uncomfortable quantity of a man who has been paid for something specific. He will not meet the captain's eyes. Not once. The captain watches him cross the camp. He does not approach him. He does not ask. The decision not to have that conversation is itself the most consequential choice he makes, because every man who knows and says nothing becomes, structurally, part of the architecture of what gets recorded. That evening, the captain burns a piece of correspondence in the flame of a single torch. We never see what it says. The act is unhurried. Routine. Just paperwork at the end of a long day. Snagov Monastery, Romania. A small island in a lake north of Bucharest, reachable only by water. The monastery there is ancient, austere, surrounded by stillness. It is marked on maps as the burial site of Vlad III Dracula. Tourists visit. Encyclopedias cite it. The question of where Vlad was buried has, for most people, a clean and settled answer. In 1933, archaeologist Dinu Rossetti opened the tomb. The excavation was conducted formally, under the auspices of the Romanian Commission of Historical Monuments. The tomb, identified as Vlad's, occupied a position of prominence near the altar, consistent with the burial of a ruling prince, consistent with the honor due a man of his station. Rossetti's team removed the covering stone and cataloged what they found. Animal bones, deteriorated organic material. Nothing identifiable as human remains consistent with a 15th century noble interment. A second tomb, unmarked, positioned without ceremony, was discovered nearby. It contained human remains wrapped in fragments of shroud. The embroidered patterns on that shroud were consistent with Wallachian nobility of the period. Those remains were removed, documented, and subsequently lost in the institutional disorder of 20th century record-keeping, which is its own quiet catastrophe. The physical evidence of a possible answer, dissolved into bureaucratic absence. Here is what the empty tomb at Snagov actually tells us, when read not as a mystery, but as a solution. If the power structures that consolidated after Vlad's death needed his remains to have an official location, a sacred site, a closed question, a place where inquiry could be directed and then concluded. An empty tomb is not evidence of confusion. It is evidence of intent. The monastery absorbs the question. The tourists arrive. The encyclopedias cite the location. And the body, wherever it actually rests, remains where the people who controlled it needed it to remain, unavailable. The honey motif surfaces here in its starkest form. Preservation as political act. Display as authored meaning. Vlad's head, preserved in honey, carried to Constantinople, displayed at the port. That was a statement composed entirely by his enemies. His tomb, empty, visited and cited for centuries. That is a statement composed by the silence of everyone who needed the question to stay closed. Constantinople, January 1477. The container is opened at the port of the Ottoman palace. The assembled audience includes diplomatic representatives from Venice, from the Christian principalities, from the various power structures of the Eastern Mediterranean world. Mem II does not stage this display as a celebration. He stages it as a document, a verification, proof of death delivered to everyone who needed confirmation that this particular threat would not reconstitute itself. The Venetian envoy's dispatch, written that evening, describes the head's expression as composed. He is noting, faithfully, what he observes. He has no reason to question what he is seeing. He does not know about the timeline. He does not know about the 2 missing soldiers, the money, the burned correspondence, the empty tomb. He records the face as it presents itself, arranged, preserved, authored, and his record becomes the document that 5 centuries of historians will cite as evidence of how Vlad III died. 3 powers required the same story. The Ottomans needed a battlefield kill to demonstrate strength to their rivals. The Boyar conspirators needed a battlefield kill to avoid the consequences of treason. Matthias Corvinus of Hungary needed a battlefield kill to avoid the humiliation of having restored a client prince who was then destroyed not by foreign enemies, but by the men nominally under his own protection. 3 different calculations. 1 shared conclusion. The honey preserved what was useful. Everything beneath the surface had already been decided. Wallachia, January 1477. Basarab Lyota returns to power with Ottoman backing within weeks of Vlad's death. The speed alone is a form of testimony. Political transitions in 15th century Wallachia were not clean or fast under normal circumstances. This one was. The Hungarian military presence dissolved without formal protest. Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, the man who had personally financed and organized Vlad's restoration 3 months earlier, issued no public statement of condemnation, demanded no inquiry, sent no diplomatic communication asserting that his client prince had been wrongfully destroyed. The Boyar families who had positioned themselves against Vlad's return were confirmed in their estates. No one was punished. No investigation was opened. In any court, in any archive, from any power that possessed both the standing and the resources to demand answers. Nothing. That silence is not passive. Institutional silence of this completeness, this consistency across this many independent actors, does not occur naturally. It is chosen repeatedly by people who have each separately concluded that the question is more dangerous than the absence of an answer. The German pamphlet literature that had circulated across Central Europe for a decade, the accounts of impalement, of mass punishment, of a prince whose methods had made him genuinely feared by Ottoman command, simply stops. Not refuted, not corrected, allowed to calcify into legend. And legend, once it reaches sufficient dramatic density, becomes self-protecting. No one investigates a myth. Myths are not subject to evidence. Within 2 years, Basarab Lyota himself would be deposed, and Vlad's own son Minia would briefly hold the contested throne. The wheel continued turning. But the story of December 1476, the story of what happened on that frozen field, who arranged it, who carried what along which road to which destination, that story had already been sealed. By the time anyone thought to look, the tomb was empty, the correspondence was ash, and the soldiers who knew were old men with families and every reason to remember things the way the official version required. 550 years is a long time for a lie to hold, but it held, not through brilliant maintenance, not through active suppression, but through the quieter mechanism of collective preference. The 19th century needed Vlad as a symbol of Romanian resistance against Ottoman domination, which required a heroic death. Bram Stoker, in 1897, borrowed the name Dracula for a Gothic novel with no interest in the historical record. But his global cultural reach retroactively buried the real man under a mythology so vivid that serious historical inquiry produced almost no popular interest. By the 20th century, the question of how Vlad III actually died had been rendered irrelevant by the scale of what he had become in the imagination. The empty tomb at Snagov became a tourist site. The Venetian dispatches sat in the archive in Venice, unread by most, describing a composed face and asking nothing further. The people who constructed the cover story in December 1476 could not have anticipated this. They were buying weeks, perhaps months, enough time to consolidate the new political arrangement before scrutiny arrived. They could not have known they were buying centuries. They could not have known that each generation would find, independently, its own reason to prefer the version that required no further questions. The Venetian envoy's document remains in the archive. It describes the face as it was presented. It preserves, like honey, the moment after the decision had already been made, the story already authored, the meaning already assigned. It asks nothing. It answers nothing. It simply holds the shape of what the powerful needed history to remember. If this channel's work of pulling documented history out from under its official version is what brought you here, subscribe now. Because the erasures do not stop with Vlad. Every week, another sealed record, another empty tomb, another face described as composed.